So this is how Power BI works and works with your data, is what's called these tabular models. I can show you that through, if I go to Task Manager, I can open up this Power BI, just so you guys believe me, right here. So you can see the SQL Server Analysis Services, and that is what's running the data. So if I go to details, you can see this MSD, MMD, SRV executable. That might be a little too technical or the details too much, but that's the technology behind it. So use case for exactly what he was explaining is we were connecting to a data source via live query, and we were just getting really slow performance, and we wanted to speed it up and figure out how we could speed it up. So one of the things we did was we connected to the SSAS instance and saw what queries Power BI was sending to the data warehouse, so that way we could figure out how to increase the performance or minimize some of the things based on like how we designed it in Power BI or things like that. So I'm going to jump into Visual Studio. Visual Studio is just like a ton of different things, a lot of programming and opportunities there. It can also run a lot of business intelligence projects, and I'm going to set one up really quick. So I'm just going to go to File, New, Project, and one of the options, and this is Visual Studio 2015. There's 2019, but I'm going to use 2015. So you can see here under Business Intelligence, I have a couple options. This Analysis Services Tabular Project is what I'm going to set up, and you can name it and put it in whatever you need. I guess before I go any further, because I feel like some of you might be like, why do I need to know this? What is going on here? Let me go over why use Azure Analysis Services Tabular Model. So, like I said, if you're exceeding the Power BI Pro limit of 1 GB in your model size, then that's a good reason. I see a lot of companies, what they'll do is they'll be like, well, we don't know what to do, so we're just going to cut out some data. We're going to only use a month or a year's worth of data, so we don't hit this limit all the time. But I think you're going to kind of limit yourself in your analytics that way. So this might be a good option. Also, the better performance, if you're finding that a lot of your visuals are just running slow and the filtering and things aren't working well, again, you generally, due to size, you can get better performance through using this. You're able to, so I don't know if you've ever experienced this with, a lot of users in Power BI. You can have a lot of people connect to different sources. You can start creating a lot of different data sets inside of Power BI. And then when you publish things to the online service, you have 100 or, who knows how many data sets, and you're trying to manage those. And it just becomes a big headache for kind of managing that kind of solution. The Analysis Services Tabular Model can live and be that kind of one source of truth and not allow or not require people to need to connect to different things, because the Analysis Services is going to have it and be that good performance you need. You can actually source control. So I don't know if you've ever tried to source control Power BI. It's terrible. It's hard. One thing that you can do with a tabular model is you can actually script it in XMLA, and then you can change the XMLA. It's similar to JSON, and then you can use that in source control, and it's a lot easier in source control. So another benefit there. You can process by partitions. What that means is if you are, when you go and need to refresh your data inside of Power BI, and it refreshes everything, and it's like, I don't need everything refreshed, I just need the new stuff. That's what the partitions allows you to do. So if you have a tabular model set up in Analysis Services, now you're able to set up these partitions where it'll say, just give me the recent stuff, because all the old stuff hasn't changed. I don't need to drop it and bring it back in again. Save you that time. Then we have kind of what we were talking about in the back. You can use it in a lot of different client tools. So if you have someone that prefers to use Excel, then they can connect directly to Analysis Services in Excel and use a lot of that functionality. You can also connect to SSMS, SSRS. Analysis Services is just kind of agnostic to a specific tool, which is nice. And that, again, that ability to write DAX and MDX queries against the model, and then you can kind of transpose that into SQL if you'd like, or just try and understand really what's happening in Power BI if you're running into specific issues. You can actually diagnose some things utilizing DAX, because DAX isn't just a formula language, it's also a query language. Okay, so I'm going to just go over really quickly how to set that up inside of Visual Studio and what you'll do. Once you open up and start a tabular model project, you can go to model and then you can import from data source. And then you'll see the connections that you have. I'm going to import something from SQL Server, and I'm just going to connect really quick. You just put in the server name and provide the credentials you need. And the database name. I'm going to test the connection to make sure I got it right. Succeeded. Go to next. There'll just be a few prompts. I won't go into those right now. So then it's going to show me what's in my database that I want to bring into my tabular model. It's very similar to importing into Power BI in the first place. So I'm going to just do a few of these tables, a few of these fact tables, hit finish, and then what it will do is bring them in to Visual Studio. And once they're loaded in, I'll have the functionality to actually define what the model should look like. While that's loading in, I'm going to go to Azure and show you what to do. So if you go to portal.azure.com, let me just go to the home. Oh, yeah. So one thing that I can do is just search Analysis Services. Oh, it's already here. But yeah, so you can search here, and if I go to Analysis Services, it'll bring this up. I'll get to this screen, and it's basically saying, hey, we're going to set up a server for you that is going to host your tabular model, right? Because I need a place for this tabular model to go. And the thing that I wanted to touch on is kind of this pricing tier and how Microsoft charges you. They basically charge you by usage of your model. So let's say I were to pick a tier and set up the server. Let's check the Visual Studio. It's not quite ready. So basically, I'm not going to get too far into the Visual Studio side of it, but I'm almost going to recreate this here from Power BI side in Visual Studio. And then from there, I can just say, hey, this is where I'm going to process the cube. I'm going to assign it to this server that I have set up, and then I'm going to deploy it to that server. Once it's deployed to that server, what I can do is under Get Data, I can go to Analysis Services. It's one of the most common under those fields. If I go to that, then I put in the server name and the database, which is what I would define inside of Visual Studio. And then I'll just provide, in the next screen, I would provide it the credentials, and it'll load in that tabular model just like it's loading in here. And now I have a very similar experience, just with a lot more data. Again, some of the things that we talked about. So this is done. So let me show you just really quick what this looks like. So one of the things that you have an option is to go to each individual table, and you can go through and look at the structure of it. And then if I hit Add Column, it should allow me to, I guess I have to right click and then it'll say Calculated Column, which is very similar to Power BI. And I have this formula bar. If I use the formula bar, and then I would use DAX, just like in the past. So let's just say zip, and it should use intelligence. So yes, you can see it's very similar to using it in Power BI, saying you mean zip from dim customer. It's like, yes, I do. and then you know, I could just concatenate something on or whatever and create that calculated column. Now again, it's inside of my model and it lives there. When I connect to it from any source, it's going to be there. Likewise, I can click down here and it will allow me to set up a measure. So that'll error out, but that's okay. So if I click here, so again, I'm creating a measure inside of the model, and it'll live inside of the cube, or not the cube, the tabular model, and just pretend that I selected it correctly. It'll sum it, and then I'll have that measure inside of that. So the purpose being, once I process this and deploy it, then it will be inside the model. I'll deploy it to my server. When I connect in Power BI to that server, I'll automatically see those measures and calculated columns come in like normal measures and columns that I've calculated as if I were to do it in Power BI. Now, let's say that I go and create a measure inside of Power BI when my data source was the model on my server. That measure will only live inside of Power BI. The two will be separated. So the measure that I created in Power BI, it's not going to go retrospectively and update inside of the model on the server. It's going to be unique to that Power BI instance. Then if I deploy that Power BI instance up to a Power BI online service, then that measure that I created inside of the Power BI file will stay with that Power BI. So then if I were to go in and instead of connecting to the Power BI analysis or the analysis services, I connect to a Power BI data set, and that data set is based off of my model. There's a lot of things going on here, so I don't know if you're following super well. Sorry, it's not more coherent maybe, but that data set that lives in the Power BI online service will now house everything that my server has, along with what the original Power BI file had created inside of it as well. And now that Power BI data set can be connected to through other Power BI files and house that as well. Now, generally, I'll be honest, usually what I do, so if I am in SQL Server, I have the option to connect to Analysis Services, and I can connect to that model through SSMS, and that's where I can update the XMLA instead of using the Visual Studio user interface. You have a little bit more customization inside of the XMLA, at least from what I'm experienced. It's just a little more technical because you actually have to write like the XMLA to do that. But I actually kind of prefer that, one, because you can use it in source control, and two, the Visual Studio user interface just it's not as user-friendly for me. So I like just using the XMLA and creating measures and columns that way. I don't have open to the public analysis services that I can just connect to and show you right now, or I would. But I wanted to kind of walk through how you could go about setting it up and kind of how to manage, you know, more data, larger sets of data, and still have the reporting power that you want and that you find with like smaller sets of data.